Hello, hello.
There
I'm just hoping it kicks in. There we
we
are.
are. Yep. Richard is recording this call.
Indeed, he is. Welcome to the latest episode of the Red Pilled Fiction Factory from hot and sweaty Yucatan. Today, my guest is another American. His name is Dan Kemp, and he lives in the sort of Tennessee, Kentucky region. He also goes under the name of Haval Redblade on Twitter, which is where I came across him.
Oh no! Ha! One of my dirty secrets has been aired.
and today we'll be discussing his book. It's got an interesting title, Athenaeum Inc., Door Number 3, under his real name, Dan Kemp. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Doing well, Richard. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Tell us about yourself. Where are you from, and what was your background, and what's brought you to this stage in life?
Well, hasn't that been a long and twisty road? I was born in Maryland, did my first 18 years there, departed for the University of Mississippi in 1991 after finishing high school. Was going the officer cadet route through college ROTC. Then we ran into the 1995 Clinton cutbacks in the alleged peace dividend of the 90s. So I ended up out on my ass there. Bad knees, surplus of, lieutenant candidates that year. And I was fixing slot machines in a casino in Tunica, Mississippi when I finally got around to graduating. And I said, if I stay in the casino business, I'm going to be dead or in rehab in another 3 years. There were a certain number of free drinks, certain number of jealous husbands. You have to be careful with that sort of thing. So I decided a change of scenery would be good for me. So I moved back to Maryland, dropped all my stuff off at my parents' house, and wandered into the Army recruiters. And I said, well, I can always apply for officer candidate school later. And I never did, partly because NCOs have a hell of a lot more fun. When you're an officer, they expect you to go to meetings and be in charge of things. And instead, I'm just
wear a tie.
I'm sort of hanging back with my nose in a book in between major training events and, in between major gunfights. And it was a very interesting life. And I did that for just over 10 years until my knees and my back, finally stalled out again. And then I went to work for one of the contractors, and from the contractors into federal service. And I kept writing, and I kept reading, kept writing, generally having fun. And then one of my writing projects landed on very fertile ground, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and all of a sudden, holy shit, I've got a mostly completed novel manuscript here. Now what the hell do I do?
Hang on, so let's backtrack a bit. This was just you say it was one of your writing projects, but it was a complete hobby at this point. It wasn't...
complete hobby.
Right.
Absolutely a hobby.
And it sort of grew into something bigger and perhaps better than you had expected. So
yes, my hard drive is full of scraps and abandoned writing projects and things I wrote for fun, but they just sort of ran out of gas. And this one didn't.
Right. That's very important. Yeah. When you see that in something you're writing, it sticks. That's a breakthrough. Yeah, great. So is this the book we're talking about? Athenaeum Inc.?
That is the book we are talking about. With door number 3, which the title confuses some people. They're like, what about doors number 1 and door number 2? I'm like, at least read the back cover of the book. I swear to God, it's explained there. If you ever watch the old game show, Let's Make a Deal, it's extremely self-explanatory. But, maybe that cultural reference is just a little too dated for some people today. But
yes. It's a very long book. How long did it take you to write?
On and off, 3.5 years.
Yep, it looks like that. It's a very excellently executed book, very professionally executed. There's really, it could have been the 8th or 9th work by a New York Times bestseller author. It's really that good in its complexity and its the way you've executed it. It's superb. So at what point did the writing bug grab you? You say you went to your college. Was it
Oh
at the
God,
college, before college?
it started in junior high school,
Right.
probably. You know, I mean, I was just a weird, nerdy kid who grew up on Tolkien and Dragonlance novels, and also a whole lot of Tom Clancy and Webb Griffin and various other military authors. And you get hooked, and you're like, okay, 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 and you take all these words in the head, and all of a sudden they start forming new chains of their own, and you start trying to write them down. And because it's the 80s, I'm doing it by hand in a spiral notebook, so boredom set in quickly. So I'd write a scrap here, a scrap there, and nothing really came of any of them, because a whole bunch of it was honest to God derivative crap. um but as you keep going, you get better, you get better. I took writing of the short story at Ole Miss as an elective with Barry Hannah, and that was the year that Hannah had his Pulitzer nomination. That's sort of like going to the gym with somebody who won a gold medal at the Olympics. Oh wait, that happened to me too. I spent 2 weeks in Iowa getting my ass kicked by a guy who won a gold medal at the Barcelona games. Yeah, we all paired off by there were 19 students, one instructor. We all paired off by size. We get down there to the end. He just sort of stopped, looked at me at the end. He said, "Guess you're with me, big guy." It was painful. It was a very painful experience. But we aren't here to talk about my high school wrestling career.
True. So the bug had got you early. You took notes. This is a very similar story to mine. I think it was about that age that I started taking notes in a ring binder and in pen and pencil or whatever. And then gradually these things do sort of network themselves and become a matrix of their own, don't they? And then suddenly you start thinking, where's the plot that fits all this together? And the next thing you know, you're writing. But okay, so you've been practicing, let's say, the art of writing for sounds like quite a long time. Decades. Yeah, which is the way it is, unfortunately. It's a complex business. It's an art, not a science. And when did you decide that when was the bulk of the writing done? After you've left the army?
The bulk of this one was done within the last few years. Mainly, I'd started maybe 2019 before lockdowns. The model for Cash and I were, having some discussions on how would you deal with laundering very large quantities of paper dollars. And then it turned from an academic discussion to somebody should write that. I don't see anyone else around here to write that. Well, fuck, it might have to be me.
I love the way.
I started writing little scraps of it, and I started stringing together more and more scraps of it. And Jennifer started contributing more, and Julia threw in a few scraps, and other friends of mine, threw in bits and pieces. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a second, I've got 60,000 words here. And it tied into my friend's novel where I had been a minor character. So I'd been writing the whole thing in first person shooter style. And then I let another friend of mine read it, Christopher Denote, who both appears in the afterword because we were grad school classmates. And also, he's got a minor appearance as a character in the middle at one of the briefing scenes. And he read it. He said, "Dude, you wrote a classic heist novel." He said, "It's a Guy Ritchie movie on paper." He said, "I hear the narrator's voice as Jason Statham." I said, "Considering the narrator's an American guy who lives in Tennessee, I don't think the accent's really going to work." But I took it as a compliment. He's like, "You've got to finish this." Well, shit, I've never actually finished a major writing project in my life except for my master's thesis. So I just kept going and going and writing, and I was sitting about 90% when I went to the LibertyCon convention in Chattanooga last year. And I'm at range day. There's this little dark-haired guy tells another friend of mine, "Hey, I'm leaving. Everybody, I'm into older guns than most of these guys. I don't really know anybody." I looked at him. I said, "First, I brought too much ammo not to share. Secondly, you owe me now. So get your ass back over there on the firing line and help me go through all this because it's too much to take out." So while I'm giving him a class on the loading and firing of the M1 Garand, he looks at me. He's like, "So, is this your first time at the convention?" I said, "No, I've been coming on and off for a couple of years." And I mentioned some of the authors I knew who were there. He said, "You written anything yet?" I said, "Funny you should mention that. I got a novel manuscript that's about 90% that I really don't know what the hell to do with." He looks at me and said, "I'm a publisher, right?" I looked at him and I said, "Dude, I don't even know who you are." No offense.
Wow.
But he's like, "Oh, John Holmes, no relation to the porn actor. Yeah, you remember the PowerPoint Ranger Facebook page? That was me, and now I run Canon Publishing." Oh, sweet. So we're while in between, emptying magazines of ammunition downrange, he says, "So what's your novel about?" And we chatted about it a little bit. He said, "I kind of like to look at that. Can you send it to me real quick?" I said, "Funny, I do have a draft, in my email," and I get on my phone. All right,
Wow.
yeah. And we range day finishes. We get down to the convention itself, and I see him reading it on his phone. As we're passing each other back and forth in the hallway in between different panel discussions and events. And finally, he messages me back. He said, "This isn't my style at all, and I can tell you're way more into guns than I am." I'm like, "That's funny for a guy I met at a firing range who's also a former NCO, but okay." I admit I'm more into guns than most people. He says, "But having talked to you, you definitely wrote this the way you talk. It works for you. Fuck it, let's do this." I'm like, "Cool."
Wow.
I just sold my first novel, and it's not done yet.
Wow.
Now I have to finish it.
What luck to find, first of all, a publisher, but second of all, a publisher who's not completely woke and brainwashed and antagonistic towards anything that's...
There's more of those than you would think. It's a short list, but there's more than
short list.
Tony Weisskopf at Bayen is excellent that way, but Tony also publishes Larry Correa, who was sort of the godfather of non-woke sci-fi authors on Twitter. Yep. Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere. Larry is one of those role models. I would very much love to get an anthology piece in with Larry, but ask me about that one in a year. Let me see if I make the cut for that one.
So, but can you just briefly...
I have tried.
Well, LibertyCon, I presume, is a sort of right of center, sort of freedom lovers conference.
Yes,
it's not to do with writing specifically. It's more.
Oh no, the funny thing is, there's actually 3 events that use the name LibertyCon.
Okay.
There's a libertarian convention somewhere. There's I don't remember the other one. And this one is a largely sci-fi literary event in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Ah, is it annual?
Yeah, it's annual. It also sells out on the first day every year.
Well, what could be more fun?
When the tickets go on sale, you better be sitting there with your finger on the mouse button, right? Because there's a whole bunch of people who want to go to LibertyCon, and the tickets sell out in about 2 hours.
And you get to shoot guns on the side, which is even better. Fantastic.
Yeah, the range day is not an official con event, but it's part of it. Another sci-fi convention with a range day would be Confinement in which started, the clever name came about because it started during the lockdown.
Right. Oh, good.
Started in a hotel lobby in Dalton, Georgia, moved to Clarksville, Tennessee here, and then moved over to Lebanon, Tennessee, because it was closer to a better shooting range. Michael Z. Williamson runs that one. It's a very nice little convention. Total attendance of barely 100 people, but it's a great little event. Everybody knows each other. Great con suite, good food. Basically, it's one of those events where if you do not have a carry gun on the premises, one will be provided for you because people have spares.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And before, when you started writing in high school, you were probably just a normal kid like most of us. At which state?
I don't know if I'd go with normal, but...
Well, okay, but you weren't particularly political, probably, like few of us.
Oh, no. I truly was.
Growing
growing up outside Washington, D.C., politics is basically the local industry.
I
Both
see.
both my parents were school teachers. The Washington Post was on the, which wasn't quite so bad a paper in those days, was on the kitchen, was on the kitchen table every morning. And I was an early and enthusiastic reader, a profound consumer of military history books, and I got very switched on early because I grew up under Ronald Reagan in the Cold War days, growing up 15 miles away from a center of mass nuclear target.
Yeah.
So I took great interest in the world early because the world was going to take great interest in me, whether I wanted it or not. So there's a famous quote ascribed to Winston Churchill. If you're not a liberal in your 20s, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative in your 30s, you have no brain. Whether or not Churchill said this is open for some debate. There's a fair number of Churchill quotes. When he was asked about them later, it turned into, sorry, I got to let that one pass.
Churchill.
Yep, Churchill. Yeah, there's a fair number of quotes that when he was asked about them later that said, well, no, I didn't really say that one, but I wish I had.
Right.
So I will continue to ascribe that one to Churchill. Let's just say that when I was in my 20s, I had absolutely no heart at all. Probably less heart than I do now. You do acquire a certain amount of empathy and compassion as you age sometimes, and you pick up certain doubts and uncertainties that don't trouble the young. In high school, we had a wonderful class called Problems of the 20th Century that was taught in the history department. My instructor for that was a guy named Ray Ferpoli. Ray had been an Air Force vet. He'd been a Vietnam veteran in the Air Force. He said he spent his Vietnam experience in an air-conditioned photo interpretation trailer looking at reconnaissance photos for a year. So he said he had the atypical Vietnam experience. But he was still a really funny guy. And one of the girls in the class, and every week you would look at a different social issue, and we would analyze it and argue about it for a week, and the next week we'd go on to something else. It was considered an honors history elective. One of the girls in the class, I believe it was Christine Scudder, who was trying very hard to go to Dartmouth. She asked about the terms left wing and right wing and where they really fell. So Ray decided that he was going to reorganize the seating chart of the class according to the political spectrum. So he starts, he gets everybody up and he starts, assigning everybody based on their class participation and their perceived political views. Okay, you sit over here, you sit over here, you sit over here. And then he takes one of the desks, drags it out into the hallway, which was part of the class. He said, and Kemp can sit out there in the hallway. And I just sort of smiled. I'm like, I don't think I've ever been so flattered in years. A couple weeks after that, we had the nuclear weapons, the nuclear weapons class. This is, to a kid who played a lot of war games and read a lot of Tom Clancy, this was just a nice low-hanging slow ball right over home plate. Because most kids don't know a MIRV from an IRBM, from an ICBM. They don't know. Me, I did. So we get all the way through the class. We have the written test at the end of the week. Monday, he comes in, he's got all the stack of papers. He says, okay, I got good news and I got bad news. Class looks around. Good news first. And he looks, says, okay, cool. Well, the good news, the highest score was 102, both bonus points. And they're like, what's the bad news? He said, there is no curve. He said, that blew the curve on this one. And everybody just turns around and looks at me. And I'm like, wait a second. One, I feel personally attacked here. I said, two, I'm larger and meaner than all of you, because I was wrestling heavyweight on the wrestling team at the time. I'm sitting here thinking, I can't get them all at once, but I can probably cripple the first few if it comes to that. And Christine Scudder was staring at me because hell hath no fury like a white girl who thinks she just blew her chance to get into Dartmouth. And he says, okay. Infrapoli gets up at the front and says, okay, here's the deal. If we compress and do 2 units in 1 week towards the end, I will give you the opportunity to redo Nuclear Weapons Week, because below Kemp, the highest test score was only in the 60s. And everybody's like, yeah, we want to do this again. We want to do this again. So we repeat, starting literally right then, we repeated Nuclear Weapons Week from the beginning. It wasn't just a test re-prep. It was the whole thing, starting at the groundwork and all the way up. Then we retake the test. There were 7 bonus questions on that test. So following Monday, he comes in, he sets the graded papers down on the desk. He looks around, he says, all right, it's a good news, bad news thing. Everybody says, bad news first this time. He says, there is no curse. Kemp got a 107. Yeah, so I had a certain reputation even young. And
okay.
There was a line in a G.I. Joe cartoon, a G.I. Joe comic book written by Larry Hama, who I've been fortunate enough to become friends with, that said he was a very strange child that grew into an even stranger adult. That would be me.
Okay.
Larry did write part of my childhood.
Did Miss Scudder get to Dartmouth in the end, or?
Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
That's a happy ending.
Thank
at least.
God. Otherwise, I would be this chick's supervillain origin story.
Okay. Now we'll come to the book.
Okay.
It's a very hefty tone. It's a heist story. Ultimately, it's a heist story. It takes place within the framework, if you like, of a military, or at least US covert division of the intelligence services, a bit like other films. Kelly's Heroes is a heist
very clearly Kelly's Heroes.
You reference, which is one of my favorites. It's also got similarities to a couple of George Clooney films, The Three Kings, I think it's called, and obviously his Ocean's 11, which is less military, but it's that kind of romp, and it is a romp. It's very snarky. It's very funny throughout. Every line has a sort of twist or a turn somewhere along it, or every paragraph does at least.
You can't take it too seriously.
No,
you really can't. Otherwise, if you take military fiction too seriously, you miss all of the wonderful observations of the absurd that are part of military life. And that's something that Tom Clancy never got, because Clancy, God rest him, he was not great with soldiers. He was great with technology.
Yes.
He was good with the stuff that you could get out of reference books. He picked up a few things talking and interviewing officers, including a then Colonel David Petraeus. But there are just certain nuances that you'll never get unless you've spent a fair number of time at the low levels of the institution itself. And that was what I tried to carry forward into it.
Yes, and it comes across massively, as does your knowledge of what you're talking about, which was something we'll come to in a minute. I in my notes, made a comment that it's like Ludlum or Clancy in terms of detail, but it doesn't have any of the stodginess or the sort of 10 pages of detail on a type of motor and a type of rocket. No, it's a very fast-moving. It's hilarious at times. It's very clever in the concept of the plot and how they deal with it. So, and which leads to the very obvious question, one I've been dying to ask you since I got about halfway through it, is how the hell do you know so much about? Because it's a heist movie. It's about a heist of $1 billion from the cartels, which then gets recycled and laundered. How the hell do you know all these things? These are meant to be really esoteric knowledge that only a handful of people know.
I will send you a picture of my bookshelves, and when you spend 40 years obsessively reading military history and have been in the military profession in one extent or another since 1991, so yeah, that's 32 years as either an officer cadet, an enlisted infantryman, sometime planning staffs. One thing the Army's very good at doing is taking college enlisted, smart enlisted guys and being, hey, cool, we need you to sit over here and bang this stuff out at a desk while we go to another meeting. So you, like our young friend from the Massachusetts National Guard, sometimes you can catch wind of things that maybe you weren't supposed to know. But because I still draw my paychecks from the United States government, that shit I couldn't put in there.
Right.
There's a lot of things I know that could not go in that book.
Wow,
That's
because
fine.
there's a lot in there.
Yeah, but there's stuff in there that came out of Wired magazine, Newsweek, the New York Times, the Intercept, Jack Murphy's writing project at SoftRep and Connecting Vets. Jack's a great guy, wrote a couple of novels, though I don't think he's done anything lately. He's mainly concentrated on the military journalism end with Sean Naylor, who's also an excellent read for a lot of things. There's all of the information is out there floating around, and if you have the experience to synthesize it, it's not hard. It's just time consuming. I was at a writing event a couple weeks ago, and people are discussing their writing styles. You've got the outliners versus the pantsers, people who make it up by the seat of their pants as they go. I could only aspire to be organized enough to be a pantser someday. I'm like a quilter. I will take a piece and I'll set it over here, and another piece and set it over there next to it. And eventually, once I have something that looks like a novel, then I'll go back and I'll stitch all of it together and like put a paragraph connecting this piece and a paragraph connecting that piece,
Right,
and put it all together. That what you read was not written in order in any way, shape, or form. There is stuff in chapter 1 that was written last.
right.
Just because that's the way it fell together. It was fun. It was extremely time consuming. Now, and there's parts of it that I broke off. I broke 15,000 about 15,000 words off out of that one, stuck it in another file marked to save, to use later. And that became the nucleus of the sequel, which I'm currently 60,000 words into.
Oh, we'll come to that in a minute. How many words
Okay.
in your original, in the Athenaeum Inc.? How many words is it?
146.
Right. So yeah, it is a substantial read.
Well, compared to something like The Bear and the Dragon by Tom Clancy, but then again, I found out years later that Clancy, I had 2 ghostwriters working for him on that.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, and also, but it speaks volumes of your abilities, because for a first book to coordinate and collate 140,000 odd words is quite an achievement. I mean, that's why most people start out with short stories or novellas.
Oh yeah, I've written a couple of those too. None of them have actually seen print yet. It's funny. I turned in one for a alternate history anthology regarding the moon landings, and the guy who was putting it together, Bruce Weber, he either COVID got him or he had a heart attack or something, because Bruce dropped out of sight. I haven't found his obituary yet, but I'm pretty sure Bruce is no longer with us, which sucks because that was my first professional acceptance.
Understood. I'm going to read an opening paragraph from the book. The opening paragraph, okay. I mean, it grips from the first sentences, and that's why I chose the opening paragraph. It's quite a long one, but it will give people a sense of the tone and the attitude.
Writing long paragraphs is a flaw of mine. I got dinged on that in graduate school too.
I didn't notice at all. It starts, and we're following someone called the Professor, who works for a little-known U.S. military, ex-military sort of secret service group that doesn't officially exist, etc. And he basically lives out of a bunker in the middle of the mountains of Tennessee. Things were a lot simpler back when I was still a normal soldier. Back then, my life was getting drunk in the barracks and maybe puking on the next morning's run before training all day. My nights were spent meeting fascinating girls on the internet to visit and hopefully screw on my next available weekend. It was a joyful existence, a prolonged and largely blissful martial adolescence with merely adolescent problems. Unfortunately, as time goes on, you get moved up. Things can go several ways from there. While your former peers from your days leading teams or squads go upward along the conventional track to being drill sergeants or recruiters, eventually to platoon sergeant slots or higher, you go sideways. Maybe someone pulls you to a weird assignment where uniforms and written duty descriptions become a memory. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 different ID cards, at least one with a fake name on it. And when the knees start to pop their last and your back is pretty well wrecked, by then you are carrying the clipboard and moving from player to coach. If you do that well, you move up again while you go even further sideways in retirement, in inverted commas. Sometimes it's in the civil service, sometimes with a favored contractor. And then one day when the old guys who gave you your orders in your gym bags full of operating cash finally go down from heart disease, cancer, or high velocity lead poisoning, then you are now management with a capital M. You are now in charge of the team in a competitive league where there is no off season. And all I had wanted to do was hood rat shit with my friends. So that's the professor explaining very well background, progress through his career, and what the point he's reached. Is there someone that inspired you to write the character of the professor? Is it based on someone? Is it you, or was it just out of the ether?
It's very much me. This is an alternate universe me with a different paycheck. It's me. I would do something far more boring for the federal government. But if I'd gotten the call to do something a little bit different, and if my life had gone onto a different set of rails at the train station, the professor is basically what I would have done. Yeah, he's me. You can't, when you're writing a first person character, if you want somebody believable with a full set of human flaws and a set of doubts, you have to be willing to unpack a lot of yourself into it.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to do the same with the other characters. Just about, and I spell this out in the afterward, just about everybody in that book is based on somebody I know. Sometimes I had to change names, I had to change a detail or two here and there. One friend of mine is on particular duties in retirement where I had to not use his real name all of a sudden. I had to go back and change 3 sets of character names because changing his name meant I couldn't use this name here and I couldn't use this name over here. I had to do more Control F, find and replace over that than I would have thought possible, and it was an appalling pain in the ass. But it was worth it because my former roommate from jump school is an extremely competent character and really does help make the book. Military friends of mine, veteran friends of mine, people I met at science fiction conventions, a whole bunch of people get stitched into that book. One girl I know who literally used to be a Victoria's Secret model and is now still a really hot cosplay chick on Instagram, she's asked about being in the sequel.
Oh, I'm sure that could be arranged.
Yeah, well, the problem is she lives outside Atlanta, so she's probably going to not make it till book 3. Where I really fucked up was I do have a social acquaintance with a very famous American retired adult film actress named Jenna Jameson, who is mentioned in the book. Jenna's a bit of a gun nut. Jenna's a lot of a gun nut, and Jenna actually has the money to afford the hobby. She did a promotional vid for the book that you can find on my Instagram page and on my Facebook page. And then I offhandedly asked her, after I'd spent the day sending her 50 different pictures of custom 1911s, helping her refine the design for the one that she wants. I said, "Hey, Jenna, part of the sequel happens in Vegas. You're one of 4 people I know who live in Vegas. You want to be in the sequel?" She said, "Sure."
Fantastic.
So 2 days ago, there I was back and forth in Instagram DMs, sending her paragraphs back and forth at a time, helping refine her appearance in the sequel. But there's method to that madness. 1, easily recognizable character. 2, she has a lot more fans than I do. If even a fraction of her fans buy a copy of the book, then I can afford to finish my night vision goggle project.
There's a lot of raunchiness. Raunchiness is an English word, I think, more than an American one. In the first book, I imagine it's going to get worse and worse, or better and better, depending on how
really
you look at
it. It's funny. The people who bought the book expecting a bit more sexy fun time were disappointed. And then you have a fair number of hard to deal with military fiction fans who were complaining that there was too much sex in the book, despite there being no actual visible sex scenes in the book.
No.
We danced around several of them, but it's there. But on the other hand, if you're ever going to option it for a movie, again, sex sells.
Well, yeah, and it is very filmic. So I do think I don't think you need any more sex to make it any better. But I can see it being bought by a film studio. It's not particularly political
Your lips
either.
to God's ears, my friend.
Yes, indeed. And mention me if you do ever sell it.
Will do.
Yeah, it's not political as such. This is a political show ultimately, but it is.
It's funny. There's some, and
Yeah.
It's like mayonnaise on a sandwich. You want a little bit, but not too much.
Yes.
There's one of the restaurant scenes where the bad guy shows up. We discover, not to spoil it too much, you can track way more people by cell phones than you ever thought possible, even an allegedly secure cell phone. So, one of the conversations with one of the people who thinks they're the men behind the curtain, and there's sort of a reveal on between the people who believe that mankind needs to be managed and controlled and herded, and the people who really believe that people should be free to live their own lives. Around the government and military space, the idea that people should be free to live their own lives is considered some sort of revolutionary heresy. You get a lot more angry gun-owning libertarians in the military than you do other forms of government endeavor, of course. I'm sure I would not be very popular with the Internal Revenue Service, for example. But I mean, the professor makes the observation of, talking about trickle-down economics in a globalized economy. And I said, no, the money never makes it to the people who need it. And that's why you still end up with, villages without running water in them. He said, and the bad guy's like, I wouldn't have picked you for a Marxist rabble-rouser. And I said, I'm not. I just don't think a particular cell phone company, factory in a third world country should have to be generously equipped with suicide nets to keep the beneficiaries of, globalized capitalism from plummeting to their deaths after working a 16-hour shift.
That's a good example of how you sprinkle the politics lightly. There's no tract as such or rant. It's very cleverly done.
John Galt's speech works if you're Ayn Rand. Aside from that,
it's very difficult.
You can't have a political manifesto in the middle of a novel.
It's very difficult. That's something I try to do, and I do sympathise with your view. It's almost impossible to do unless you're Ayn Rand. But now the degree of detail you managed to achieve, in the discussion we had before going live, you told me that you'd had to run the manuscript by the government censors to check that it was okay. Could you?
I did.
I find that fascinating. Could you run us through that? Please.
I did. The manuscript went in, and fortunately, I won't name his name because he doesn't.
Say again. The manuscript went into where? How did it start?
There is an office at the Pentagon that does nothing but review submitted manuscripts and do publication approvals for people who previously held security clearances.
I see.
And my publisher read the manuscript. One of the early reviewers read the manuscript. We had just opened up pre-sales on Amazon when one of the reviewers, who was also retired military, said, "Hey, has anybody sent this manuscript in to be reviewed yet?" And I said, "That's funny. The briefing I got in 2009 said I only had to get nonfiction articles reviewed." They're like, "No, the regulations have changed. Everything's got to get looked at now." Oh, great. So the manuscript goes in. I got an email back from a guy who works in that office. I won't name his name, but he's a retired infantry officer who used to teach history at West Point. I made a new friend and I made a new customer out of this guy. He's a very, very, very friendly human being to deal with, which was good. We're both former gunfighters, but also with academic credentials. So we understood each other very well. And there was a very light hand in reviewing that book. The number of redactions I was asked to make, it took me 20 minutes to do. Okay. They wanted by name references to certain U.S. military special operations units reviewed. And one of them they wanted taken out. They're like, I don't think that unit's been openly admitted to yet. I said, excuse me. And I sent him a link to a 15-page monograph on the Army Special Operations Command Historical Office website detailing that unit's operations that I'd used in, it was a throwaway reference. It wasn't even like a plot point.
No.
It was something one of the background characters had done once. It was just a piece of, oh God, what was the word Jack used? Verisimilitude. It was background verisimilitude.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, great, fine. You want me to remove any you want me to take Detachment A Berlin out of there? Great. He worked undercover in Berlin. There we go. That was the edit. The unclassified cover names for the Army Special Mission Unit, they wanted that gone. Combat Applications Group, First Special Operations Detachment Delta, any of the little clever Delta Force references, they wanted those gone. SEAL Team 6 references, they wanted those gone. The one reference to the 160th Special Operations Regiment by name, they wanted that one out. And 160th has got a honest-to-God recruiting billboard on Fort Campbell Boulevard. That one's not a secret, guys. No. But I have this addiction to being able to write, my mortgage checks, and I need my day job. So if you want me to take the numbers 160 out of the manuscript, fine, great. I can do that too.
And the CIA,
along.
The CIA were also approached, but they let it slide.
Because there were a lot of intelligence historical references, most of which I admit that I cribbed from Webb Griffin novels. There are a few history books here and there. The DoD Manuscript Review Office did contact the CIA Manuscript Review Office. And their answer was, did this guy ever work for us? No. Then we don't care. We're backed up enough as it is. We don't care. He doesn't officially know anything, so
fascinating.
Let him go.
Very good. Now, you've mentioned a few other authors that inspired you, Larry Correa being one. Webb Griffin, you've mentioned several times.
Tom Clancy, for all of his flaws. I did meet Tom once. He was not the most friendly human being I've ever met. Richard Marcinko, the founding commanding officer of SEAL Team 6, met him once at a signing. Everybody in the SEAL seems to have a horror story about Dick. I met him when I was a 19-year-old ROTC cadet, and I found him the friendliest, most gracious, engaging old man you could ever meet. He and Jack Higgins set my standard for how to behave at a book signing. They are the nicest.
Right.
Well, Jack's no longer with us. He checked out of the at age 90-something. The old boy had a good run. But those two guys, God rest them, they were as friendly as you could be, and they wrote nice long paragraphs inside. It wasn't just a scrawled signature.
Yeah.
They really enjoyed hearing about how you liked their work, and they would answer follow-on questions. They were great to deal with. They really were. My only regret is that Jack Higgins checked out before he wrote the third Eagle Has novel.
Yeah.
There was The Eagle Has Landed, The Eagle Has Flown. He said, once Steiner dies, I'm like, wait, what? He said, once Steiner dies, there's a third book.
No.
He told me that in 1993. I never saw a third one.
No.
Maybe they'll find it in a filing cabinet now that the old boy's no longer with us.
Maybe. He was very prolific, so you never know.
He was. So was Griffin. They were prolific under multiple names. They were trying to get paid without burning out their audience.
I see. And so Larry Correa and those other influences on you? Heinlein?
Tom Kratman, John Ringo to a certain extent. I know them both from the convention circuit. They're both great guys. Tom Kratman's work is not stuff you read simply for the plot. Tom writes long Socratic dialogues and military tactical instructional texts that are disguised as novels. If you want to learn a
Okay.
whole lot about how to do the military art, read Tom's stuff. The plot is purely incidental to that.
I was going to say, if you want to learn how to heist $1 billion from the cartels and launder it, read your book. But
there was a certain amount of hand waving, but I think you could do it. It would work. The hard part, those containers do exist. It's just a matter of finding one.
Right. Now you mentioned you're writing another book. I didn't get it. Is it a sequel or is it
Yes.
It is a sequel. Fantastic,
Oh,
because
yes.
there's some great characters you've introduced us to.
I was told the best advertisement for your first novel is a second novel.
Fantastic.
So
Yeah.
I'm 60,000 words into the sequel. I got a head start because I'd broken some of book number 1 off, and then other pieces that didn't fit, I'd start, I'd put them over here. I actually have scraps of up to book 5.
Oh my gosh. Is it going to be as big as the previous one?
Maybe.
It's
I'd like to keep it under 125. Less world building, more violence this time. Now that we have an established fictional world that also comes off the work of my friend Seth. Seth Bailey used other army buddy of mine used me as a minor character under the name The Professor in his novel Edge of the City that came out back in 2016. And then he turned around and encouraged a bunch of us who were in the book. I get to relocate because, hey, my laptop says it insists on being charged.
Okay.
I love this Dell. It's a rebuild, but the only problem is battery life on it absolutely sucks sometimes. That's it.
All right. So will it be the similar characters, and is it another heist novel, or is it sort of a deviation from all that? Hello. Hello, we've lost you. Let's hope we can get you back. Hello. Oh dear. Well, if we don't get him back shortly, I'll have to cut the interview here. Dan, are you there? Here we are. Fantastic. Phew.
There
Gotcha.
we go.
Yes.
I didn't even lose the call. That's miraculous.
Very good. Where were we? The oh, is it a heist movie?
Other authors.
Novel. Hmm?
Oh, it's definitely a heist novel.
Yeah.
It's one part military. It's one part military thriller, one part espionage thriller, but for the most part, it's a straight up heist novel.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to it. How long do you think it will be before you finish that?
Oh, wait, no, you're asking about the sequel. Oh,
Yes.
my bad.
Yes, I am.
Oh, edit that. Yeah, okay, go back and edit that. That one's a little bit more espionage-y.
Okay.
Some of the main characters are in New York City, they're up there to scatter the ashes of old Mikey, who passed away in the first novel. And while they're up there, of course, it's a bit of a working vacation for some of them. And Morgan is out sniffing around, talking to one of the contract hackers that does dirty jobs for him. And all of a sudden, somebody shoots the hacker. Well, hell, what did he get shot for? Well, we better find this out. Maybe it's got something to do with us. Maybe it doesn't. And it escalates from there to shenanigans with another much larger, far more corporate military contractor. There's some hints of shenanigans on the part of Chinese military intelligence. There's a large fictional event in Vegas that resembles the old Soldier of Fortune magazine convention. And it's interesting. I've got a lot of plot pieces, but there's still some gaps in the middle that I'm really not quite sure where that one's going yet. But I'll get there. I'm trying to have that one done and at least turned in for manuscript review probably by November, and it won't be through manuscript review by Christmas, but yeah, hopefully out after New Year's.
Oh, wow.
Go for a 2nd February release in a row.
Fantastic. Well, we wish you the best of luck with that,
Thank
Dan.
you very much, Richard.
Or Haval. Where did the Haval Red Blade name come from? Just a good
Oh, it's a
old-fashioned.
Warhammer 40,000 reference.
Is it? Oh, okay.
My primary Facebook account, my original having been deleted for unspecified crimes against the Zuckerberg empire.
You and me both.
That one's got a Warhammer name on it as well. I'm not going to put it out there, but let's just say I have a fondness for characters from the 6th Legion, and particularly Dan Abnett's Prospero Burns.
Fair enough.
I'm old enough. I'm old enough to have played the original version of 40K when it first came out in '87. I had the only Games Workshop store in America near my house.
Is that right?
I did. I was quite lucky that way.
Well, it's been fascinating to meet you, Dan.
Thank you,
a
Richard.
Fantastic read. I do recommend it to everybody. It's crosses all boundaries and genres or types of audience, let's say. So, just if you want a good, fun, solid, very enjoyable read, Athenaeum Inc. Door number 3, and you can find out why door number 3 is so important. Well done, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll get you back once you finish the next one, because I'll definitely.
Or if I sell something else in between.
Yes, indeed, that'd be great.
Thank
Wishing
you,
you all the best.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Richard. You take care.
Thank you.